Hello, everyone. Welcome to ThinkTech Hawaii's series, which is called How Did We Get Here? I'm the host of this series. My name is DeSoto Brown. I'm the Bishop Museum historian here in Honolulu, and I am also the curator for the archives at Bishop Museum. And today I'm going to be talking about what was life like in Hawaii 100 years ago. Well, from the date that I am recording this program, you're seeing a magazine cover that is 100 years and 1 month older than today's date. Just about, just about. So let us go back in time. And before we do, I just want to say that the images you're going to be seeing today come from not only Bishop Museum Archives, where I work, but also my personal collection. And this first magazine cover is from my collection, and it's from Life magazine, which was at that time a national humor and political commentary magazine. And as you can see, it's got a Hawaiian theme on the cover. And I'm showing you this not only because it's from the right time period, but also to let you know that 100 years ago, if you were thinking nobody in the world knew that the Hawaiian Islands existed, well, no, you're not correct, because there was a lot of awareness that Hawaiian culture existed, the Hawaiian Islands existed, particularly in the United States, but internationally as well. So people already knew we were a special place. And if we go to this picture, we're also going to see that people were aware of us in terms of how products use the mystique or the appeal of the Hawaiian Islands to help sell themselves. So here is a display box for Honolulu fruit chewing gum, which no, you've never heard of, and has nothing to do with Honolulu fruit. This was made in San Francisco, but it's just a way, again, to promote a product using a familiar, at that time, image of Diamond Head and Waikiki, and again, the beauties of the Hawaiian Islands, even in 1925. Well, in terms of daily life, let's look at what some of the things were that we're familiar with today. And for example, were there a lot of telephones back in 1925? Well, yes, there were, and they were only landline telephones. There were no cell phones. There were no little telephones that you would carry around in your pocket, and there was no internet. But the landline phones did exist. Now, they did look like this thing that you're looking at. And this is what's usually called a candlestick telephone. And it worked by you picking up that thing that's hanging on the left that's got the wire attached to it. You put that to your ear, and then you spoke into the other part of the telephone. And of course, this is a dial telephone, and a lot of people today have never seen or used a dial telephone, don't even know how it works. Honolulu was one of the first cities in the country, if not the world, to have an entirely automated dial system where you didn't have to call an operator and have her connect you to who you were calling. There were thousands of telephones in 1925 in the Hawaiian Islands, but a lot of people did not have them. Well-to-do people, middle-class people had telephones in their home. A lot of businesses had telephones, certainly the big businesses did, but many, many other people did not. And there was no easy way for them to communicate with other people except either by sending a letter or going and talking to them in person. And what about electricity? Well, this is an electric sign in Honolulu in 1924. And as you can see, it says the General Tire. But it may not be easy for you to see that every one of those letters contains numerous clear glass light bulbs. So that is how this sign would be visible at night. They would turn on the lights and you could see it. There were, again, many people who had electricity and had electric lights and had electric appliances, but not that many of them. So people had irons, people had toasters, for example. Not a lot of people yet had electrically run washing machines. There were no dryers. There were no televisions. They had electric lights, They had fans. They didn't have air conditioners. So while again, it was the wealthier people, people who were middle class, people who lived in homes that were in suburbs, in urban areas, had electricity, but lots of people out in the country didn't have electricity. What did they use? Well, many of them bought kerosene at a store and took it home. And some people had kerosene fired stoves. It was much easier than using wood to cook with. And there were kerosene lamps that were glass lamps that had the kerosene fuel in the bottom. And then you lit a wick, which was made of fabric, and that gave you some light. You could carry around one of those lamps and you could put it on a table. But all of that was dangerous because kerosene was very flammable. If you dropped a kerosene lamp that was glass, as they all were, and it broke on the floor, not only did you have broken glass, but you now had flaming kerosene on the floor too. So, in the face of that, electricity was far better and far more desirable and far more steady and gave better light. Now, something that was in the midst of happening in 1925, which was very significant for the time period, was how women looked. Not so much men, because men's hairstyles didn't change much. Men's clothing didn't change much, but women's clothing and hairstyles changed a lot. The picture on the left was taken in 1922, and each of these five Japanese women here in Honolulu had made the dress that she is wearing. And they went, after they made their dresses, which as you can see are very beautifully made, very finely detailed, they went to a photographer to have their picture taken to show off the dresses they've made. Look at the skirts that they're wearing. They are quite long. They go down almost to their ankles. But even that at that time was considered quite a short skirt compared to women's shirts, women's clothings and skirts for centuries, decades before this. But look at the picture on the right. That was taken just a few years later in the 1920s. And now this young woman is wearing a skirt that's just above her knee. And that may not seem like a big deal for us now, but at the time, that was a huge revolution. And a lot of people were unsure about that. The other thing that's happened with her is that she has cut her hair. Up until that time, women did not cut their hair. They let their hair grow as long as possible, and then they kept it up on top of their head during the day in a bun or stuck up on top of her head with pins or combs or something to keep it there. The woman on the right has undergone what's called having her hair bobbed. Bobbed hair meant short hair, sometimes as short as men's hair. And with short hair, she can put on that tight fitting hat that she's wearing, which was universally popular throughout the world during the 1920s for women. Again, these don't seem like they're very big deals to us, but in the 1920s, they were huge considerations that a lot of people discussed in great detail. So, how did our economy function in 1925? Well, we relied upon the sugar industry. That was the foundation of our economy. And here's a picture of sugarcane. Sugarcane was cultivated on huge tracts of the Hawaiian Islands by 1925. The industry had really begun to grow in the 1870s. And by 1925, it was really in control. And the reason that today we have such a multi-ethnic population in the Hawaiian Islands is because of the sugarcane industry. Because all of those people got enticed to come here by them as workers in Japan, in China, in Portugal, and in the Philippines, because there weren't enough workers here to accommodate the needs of the sugarcane industry. And by 1925, about 40% of the population of the Hawaiian Islands was ethnically Japanese because of sugar industry. And how did it work? Well, the sugar cane was grown, as I said, at huge acreages. And then after it was harvested, it was taken to a sugar mill, like the one that you see in this picture. This is the Honolulu Plantation Company, which was located in Aiea. And in the background is Pearl Harbor. So that's how you could place where you are. Inside the sugar mill, there would be huge rollers that would crush the stalks and the leaves of the sugar cane. And from that, the sugary sap or liquid would be extracted. And then that would be dried and refined into sugar crystals and then put in bags. But the sugar then got sent to California to be further refined and packaged and then distributed to consumers. And all of this work in 1925 was still not mechanized very much. And there were a lot of sugar field workers like the man in this picture. Every one of those sugarcane stalks had to be cut by hand with a cane knife or machete. And then after those stalks were cut and were left lying on the ground, other people came, gathered them up, carried them, and put them into usually a little sort of temporary train that was taken out into the fields on temporary tracks, or even into carts that were pulled by animals to be taken to the sugar mill. Well, by the 1930s, this had been dramatically mechanized, and there were bulldozers that just bulldozed all the sugar cane. Nobody cut it. And then it got loaded by cranes into big trucks and then driven to the sugar mill. And that was a big change. And that's the way things worked up until the sugar industry ceased to function here in the 21st century. And now there's no sugar cane at all. Second in importance in terms of the economy was the pineapple industry. And here's a pineapple field stretching off into the distance. Pineapples do not need as much water to grow as sugarcane. So places where sugarcane couldn't be cultivated, you could cultivate pineapples instead. And this too was not a mechanized industry so much yet in terms of harvesting, because and planting too. People had to plant each one of these pineapple plants by itself, and then people had to pick each one of the ripe pineapples, put them in a burlap bag, carry them to a place in the field where they could be dumped into wooden crates. And then the wooden crates got taken to every single one of the pineapples grown in the Hawaiian Islands were put in cans. And by 1925, which is when this picture was taken at the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, a lot of the canning process was very mechanized. And it was really pretty remarkable for the time. The pineapples were fed into the machines that cut off the tops, cut off the exteriors, and then cut the inside parts into round slices, all pretty much in one easy mechanized way. And so that meant that the canneries really put out a tremendous amount of product, which was shipped all over the world. However, even though a lot of it was mechanized, there still were things that humans had to do. And that's what you see going on in this photograph. This is where the slices of pineapple go by on a conveyor belt, and women pick them up by hand and individually put them into cans. And then when the cans are full, they get taken away to be sealed. So many cans were used here for canning pineapple that the American Can Company opened a can producing factory in Honolulu, where most of the pineapple canneries were located. And this job of sorting the slices and putting them in cans was only done by women. So men did all the rest of it, but only women did this part. And every one of those millions of cans of pineapple had a paper label put on the outside of it. And there were hundreds and hundreds of different brand names that were used for Hawaiian pineapple, like the one that you see here. The biggest company that grew and canned pineapples was called Hawaiian Pineapple Company. And it wasn't until 2 years after 1925 that that company shifted to its more familiar name, which is Dole Pineapple. Well, Dole no longer cans pineapples here, and nobody does anymore, but Dole still does exist as a Dole Foods Corporation, which handles a lot of different types of fruit and probably vegetables too. So it is a multinational corporation, and that's how it got started, which was as the Hawaiian Pineapple Company here on the island of Oahu. Not every single one of those pineapples got put in a can because there were other smaller sort of cottage industries that dealt with pineapples as well. And here you see a box and a label from the Mid Pacific Candy Factory located in Honolulu in 1925. And these are confections, these are candied pineapple. The long skinny box is for glacé pineapple, which means it's slices that are covered with a thick layer of sugar. The other one, I'm not exactly sure of what pineapple lay was, but it was obviously a type of candy. And there were, of course, a lot of other smaller industries like that that existed in 1925 and that still exist today, in which people make small quantities of things like candies and cookies and so forth. Something that was increasing in significance in 1925, growing very fast, in fact, was a number of automobiles and trucks and other vehicles. And that's shown here by this 1925 Hawaii license plate. And at the time, the car manufacturing industry in the United States was really booming, and it continued to boom tremendously through all of the 1920s. And because the manufacturing capacity was so huge, the prices of cars could be lowered a great deal. And so there was a big boom, not only here, but in the rest of the United States, because we were the territory of Hawaii at the time, in car sales. And because there were so many cars being sold, that meant that there were car dealerships, just like this one in 1925. Palama Auto Company, obviously in the Palama district of Honolulu, sold Chevrolets. And not only today, like it, just as we are expecting today, they sold new cars, but they also serviced cars. So you can see on the side that it says auto repair shop. So car dealerships function in the same way then as they do now. And cars had been in the Hawaiian Islands at this point for 26 years. And even people who lived way out in the country knew what a car was. They had seen a car, they had seen other cars, they may have ridden in cars. Many people didn't own a car yet, but increasing numbers of people were. And one of the reasons they were able to do so is because there were used cars on the market. Lots of people were buying new cars. That meant they were trading old cars. Then old cars, used cars, became so inexpensive that a lot of people were able to become a car owner. And in addition to having cars, obviously there are all kinds of other stuff you have to do as well to accommodate them. And you need gasoline. And this is a gasoline tanker truck that would have delivered gasoline to gas stations for cars to use it. Notice how dangerous this truck is. There are no doors. If anything was to happen to this truck, that it was in a collision, the driver would simply be thrown out of the vehicle uncontrolled. No seatbelt, no nothing. Cars had no safety equipment at that time, even the nicest ones, even the most expensive ones. Therefore, people were injured and killed at very high rates compared to today for the number of cars that there were on the road. And just because there were a lot of cars doesn't mean that all of the roads were good in 1925. And I'm going to guess that in 1925, there were about 20,000 vehicles in the Hawaiian Islands, which is virtually nothing today. But at the time, it was something that a lot of people were giving a lot of thought to because cars need roads in order to drive. And not all the roads were good, as I said. So here's a photograph from February of 1925 in the Kaimuki district of Honolulu. And we're looking Mauka from, this is 15th Avenue, seen from Wailea Avenue. And the road is laid out. I mean, there's obviously a space where you're supposed to drive, as you can see. And there are homes that have been built facing onto this road, but it's not paved, it's just dirt, which means if it's dry, when you drive over it, you raise a lot of dust. And when it's wet, it turns to mud. But it's also bumpy. It's got big rocks in the way. Today we would consider this completely unacceptable. Well, things were improving. And here's the same view in August of 1925. And now There are curbs. Now there are cement sidewalks. Now there are cement driveways to each one of the houses, and you can see the houses. So things look there. It's a much bigger improvement, but I don't think the road's been paved yet. It's ready to be paved, but it still looks like it's dirt. There were a lot of places in the Hawaiian Islands that also had dirt roads, but they were not served by roads to the outside world. In other words, like, for example, the town of Hana on Maui, there was no road to get to Hana or from Hana. Um, that road wouldn't be built until 1927. So if you were traveling to or from Hana, you had to do it on a boat, not over land. However, that does not mean that they didn't have cars. They did have cars because cars could be put on ships. The ships could go to small harbors throughout the Hawaiian Islands. A car could be taken off of the deck of the ship by a crane on the ship. And then, as you see here in this picture, put lowered down onto two large rowboats, or essentially lifeboats, as they would have also been used on the ship. And then ballast between the two boats, it would be rowed to a dock where a crane on the dock would pick it up and put it on land, which is pretty crazy. But this is the only way it was possible to load and unload vehicles to various small communities throughout the Hawaiian Islands. And these communities tended to have docks because sugar was shipped from a lot of these small docks throughout the Hawaiian Islands, because, as I was telling you, sugar was the main crop to be put onto ships. So they were also able to handle cargo like cars. What was it like to drive a car in 1925? Well, as this diagram shows you, cars in 1925 didn't have turn signals yet. There were no blinkers. And cars usually only had one tail light. And that one tail light would light up when you stepped on the brakes, but it didn't blink. And so you were legally required to use arm signals to show that you were going to turn or stop. And when I got my driver's license in Honolulu in 1971, I still had to use these arm signals. I had to learn them and use them for my driving tests, even though at that point they were pretty much archaic and obsolete. Cars did not have blinkers until 1940, and they were installed on cars purely voluntarily. They weren't required legally at that time. What else was it like to drive a car in 1925? Well, most cars were driven the same way we drive a car now. There's a steering wheel, there was a brake, there was an accelerator. However, there was also a clutch pedal because you had to shift manually. Cars did not have automatic transmissions yet, and they wouldn't again until 1940. So everybody had to shift, and you had to use turn signals, as you can see by this diagram. There were also a great number of Ford Model T cars, which were very popular because they were inexpensive, and they were still for sale in 1925, even though they were in their last 2 years before they were taken off the market. And the Model T was driven completely differently from the way we drive now. And to accelerate, for example, you had to use a stalk next to the steering wheel or on the steering wheel column instead of stepping on the accelerator, which you could do too. Totally bizarre. So people who were accustomed to driving had to know two totally different ways to operate a vehicle, depending on whether it was a Model T or some other kind of car. There were a number of buildings which we're still familiar with today in Honolulu in 1925, but a lot of other ones hadn't been built yet. So, for example, this is the main public library in downtown Honolulu at the corner of Punchbowl Street. And it had opened in 1913, so obviously it was there in 1925. But across the street on the right, to the right of this building, where Honolulu Hale City Hall is located, it didn't exist yet. It wasn't built until several years later. And that's true of a number of other buildings that are historic that we think of today as maybe being around then. Well, in 1925, no. This building was. We normally think of this building as the post office. That's what it's mostly called, because it does contain the downtown post office. in it, but it's actually a federal building. It was built to house offices for the federal government as well as federal courtrooms. And it is still standing today. It's across the street from Iolani Palace, across King Street. You cannot get this view of it anymore because there are trees in the way. So when you're driving by, you may not notice it as certainly clearly as you would have back in 1925. And another very important historic building was being built at the time in 1925, but it hadn't opened yet. And that was Aloha Tower. And here it is under construction. Aloha Tower was part of a large project to update Honolulu Harbor. And at the base of it was built a large horizontal structure that you see here, which housed Piers 8, 9, 10, and 11, which is where the big passenger ships always tied up, usually when they came, when they arrived and when they left from Honolulu Harbor. And Aloha Tower was completed and opened the following year, 1926. And it was supposed to serve two purposes. One was that it was kind of a lookout for people to monitor ship traffic in Honolulu Harbor. And it was possible for those people to hoist flags or other signals on the tower, at the top of the tower. On its, as you can see, it's got a spire in the center of it, which was to provide sort of traffic control, as I said, for the harbor. But it also was built as a symbol because at the time, everybody who came and went from the Hawaiian Islands, from the city of Honolulu, could only do it by boat, could only do it by ship. And the tower was supposed to be a symbol for tourists to see when they arrived and to see when they left, and for people to associate with the Hawaiian Islands. And that worked. And in the illustration you can see on the right, Aloha Tower immediately began appearing in advertising and promotion for tourism to the Hawaiian Islands because that was what it was built to do. Well, if you traveled on a ship, you had pretty much two different companies, particularly if you were going between here and the west coast of North America to the United States. There were two shipping companies that you could use. The first was the Los Angeles Steamship Company, which is what I'm showing you here. And it was called LASCO. LASCO started as just running ships between Los Angeles and San Francisco and California. But in 1922, they began coming to the Hawaiian Islands. And if you were traveling to or from Los Angeles, this was the only type of ship that you could take versus its main competitor, which was Matson Navigation Company, that only came and went from San Francisco. And Matson was older than, had been serving the Hawaiian Islands certainly longer than LASCO had. And in 1930, Matson bought out LASCO, and then it began serving both ports of Los Angeles and San Francisco. And eventually, Matson stopped carrying passengers in 1970, but it is still the main carrier of our cargo today. It gets to us that we all depend upon very much. And in 1926, Matson also bought out another competitor, the Oceanic Steamship Company. And so the Matson ships then began traveling all throughout the Pacific, all the way to Australia, New Zealand, and some other stops. And that was very lucrative for them in another way, which is too complex for me to get into. But what about airplanes? Yes, there were airplanes in 1925. The first airplane flight had occurred in Hawaii in 1910. So people were accustomed to seeing and hearing airplanes flying overhead. Most of the airplanes in use, however, belonged to the Army and the Navy. And that's because the military was very much a presence here in 1925 and continuing to strengthen and have even more men and even more equipment. Airplanes could also carry mail. So this airplane in this photograph in 1925 did carry air mail on just the island of Oahu, I believe, which was faster than driving it, but not that much important. But you couldn't get on an airplane and fly anywhere. There were no commercially scheduled airlines yet. Most people had never been in an airplane, and if they had, it was because they got taken up for a short flight for which you could pay $5 or $10, which was a lot of money then, just to fly around and look at things from the air. It wouldn't be until 1929 that inter-island airways would start flying between the Hawaiian Islands, and that's what is now Hawaiian Airlines today. If you were a tourist coming to the Hawaiian Islands and you came to Honolulu, where would you stay? What hotel would you go to? Well, tourism was growing in 1925, but it was still very small compared to the sugar and pineapple industries in terms of how much money it was making. The biggest hotels at that point were in downtown Honolulu, and one of them, as you can see on the left, was the Blaisdell Hotel, which is still standing today on the Fort Street Mall. And on the right, the even bigger and grander Alexander Young Hotel, which was located on Bishop Street, occupying the entire block between Hotel Street and King Street. But most tourists didn't want to stay in downtown Honolulu because they were here for the tropical experience. So they instead went to Waikiki, and they could stay at the biggest hotel there, which was the Moana Hotel. And this is the Moana Hotel as it appeared in the 1920s. The middle part, which is made of wood, opened first in 1901, and then the two wings on either side, which are concrete, opened in 1918. And this was the biggest, most comfortable hotel in Honolulu at the time. And you may be thinking, well, what about that other historic 1920s hotel, the Royal Hawaiian Hotel? Well, the Royal Hawaiian Hotel in Waikiki didn't exist yet in 1925. It didn't open until February of 1927. But on the property where the Royal Hawaiian was going to be built was another hotel, which is called the Seaside Hotel, as you can see by these two advertisements from the Seaside Hotel. And this is what the Seaside Hotel looked like in 1925. It didn't have one big building. It consisted of a lot of smaller home-like bungalows, as they were called. And something very important was happening to this property in 1925, which was that the landowner, which was Bishop Estate, which is today's Kamehameha Schools, was soliciting proposals for a major redevelopment of the property because the Bishop Estate must earn money to run the Kamehameha Schools. And it was realized that this property in the center of Waikiki could earn a good deal more money for the schools to support them. So the Bishop Estate was asking for people to develop the entire property, to demolish the Seaside Hotel if they chose. And it was required that this new hotel cost at least $100,000, meaning it had to be a luxury hotel. That's what led to the construction of the Royal Hawaiian, which would open, as I said, 2 years after 1925. Waikiki in general was changing a great deal at this time in the early to middle 1920s. Waikiki originally, in its natural state, was wet. See in this picture, there were ponds. This is where kalo was grown by Hawaiians. This is where rice was grown by Japanese and Chinese growers. This is where ducks were raised. It was an agricultural area. But it was understood also that Waikiki had the capacity to earn more money. And in order for that to happen, it was being turned into dry land. And that process was occurring through the digging of the Alawai Canal. And that's what you see going on in this photograph. The dredge is digging through the land or digging through what's ever in front of it. And it's making a canal. And all of the stuff that it's digging up, which is mostly limestone, it's coral, is being pushed through pipes to be dumped in the areas which were naturally wetlands to turn it into dry land. So Waikiki in 1925 was being transformed into what we see today, a large, wide Alawai Canal, and then lots of dry land, upon which today there is the high-rise city of Waikiki of itself. What about entertainment in 1925? Well, you could go to the movies, just like we can go to the movies today. Hollywood in 1925 was incredibly prolific. It was producing huge numbers of movies, that were being shown not only in the United States, but all over the world. And here is a movie theater in downtown Honolulu. This is the States Theater in 1922, and it was located on 4th Street. But there was a major difference in movies in 1925, and that is that they were silent. They did not have soundtracks. There was no dialogue. You did not hear anybody speaking. You didn't hear anybody singing. You didn't hear any sound effects. You only heard live music that was played in the theater itself. So there were always live musicians playing, usually at least a piano, if nothing else, to provide accompaniment for the silent movie. And for Japanese films, which were being shown here at that time as well, there was a live narrator who was also on the stage called a benshi, who would speak words for the characters and explain to the audience what was going on. The sole surviving theater still functioning from that time period today of 1920, that was in 1925, that's still functioning today, is this one. This is the Hawaii Theater, which is on Bethel Street in downtown Honolulu. It opened in 1922. It was the biggest and grandest theater in the Hawaiian Islands. It closed in the 1980s. It was probably going to be demolished, but a group of people got together, saved it, restored it, and today it's a performing arts theater with a beautiful interior. It is a real asset to the city of Honolulu, and it's very fortunate that we still have it. Other types of entertainment, well, there was a lot of live music then, and obviously many Hawaiians were and still are extremely accomplished musicians and singers. And not only did Hawaiians perform music here, they performed it internationally all over the world. So Hawaiian music was quite popular at that time. And this is a group of Hawaiian musicians. You clearly can see that they're Hawaiian, but they are in London, England, and they're performing in a show that's called Happy Hawaii. And you see that on the posters behind them. And not only were Hawaiians performing live, they also were making records. Here are 3 labels from 3 Hawaiian music records from around 1925. And these records were not being recorded here because there was no local record company yet. There was no recording equipment. Most of these people who were recording these traveled to the United States or elsewhere to make records, to make recordings. And these were selling very well throughout the entire world. Records at that time turned at 78 revolutions per minute, and they were very fragile, and they were 10 inches across. And if you dropped them, they broke. And they didn't have very good sound quality either. They were scratchy. However, they were still very popular. And not only was it popular to listen to Hawaiian music in 1925, it was popular to try to play it yourself. And these 2 booklets from the 1920s show you what I'm talking about. The one on the right is to learn to play the ukulele, which was really a big deal in the 1920s all over the world. It was associated with young people in college. And so a lot of people learned to play the ukulele for fun when they were in college, but also the Hawaiian guitar, meaning the early steel guitar, the acoustic steel guitar, as we might say, which was a guitar, but not played in the normal upright position, but held flat on your lap. And you pushed and pulled a steel bar over the strings as you strummed them. This was hugely popular. And this self-instruction booklet is one of many that were published then for people to learn to play the steel guitar themselves. You could also go out and dine at restaurants in 1925, just the way you can today, as you can see by paper pieces. And if you were to look at a menu from 1925, you at how cheap everything was. But that is deceptive because the dollar was worth a good deal more than that it is now. So something that sold for 10 cents, that wasn't 10 cents as we think of it now in 2025. It was a goodly amount of money for most people at the time. And there were a lot of things on menus a lot of things would be familiar, but there were some other things on menus in the 1920s that you would not see at all now, like calf's liver. Restaurants don't serve liver here. Frog's legs, and frog's legs do in fact taste like chicken. And frogs, and, yeah, frog's legs. But one thing you could not do in 1925 was go to a bar. You could not order any kind of alcohol in a restaurant or bar. Why? Well, because the manufacture and sale of alcohol was prohibited throughout the United States, even the territories, including us. That was because of something called prohibition. And that was due to the 18th Amendment of the Constitution of the USA, which was ratified in 1920, that prohibited alcohol. Thus, this was called prohibition. Now, that doesn't mean that alcohol didn't exist. So, Primo beer, for example, was not being brewed. It had been brewed before that. It would be brewed again after that. But during this time, couldn't get Primo beer, but you could get alcohol, and lots and millions of people did. It didn't stop the sale of alcohol. It didn't stop the consumption of alcohol. It just made millions of people criminals because they made alcohol themselves. They sold it. They bought it. It helped organized crime grow a great deal. It was a complete failure. And finally, the 18th Amendment would be repealed in 1933. And starting in 1934, alcohol would again be available. There would be bars. There would be Primo beer. In 1925, you had to buy it illegally, and you had no idea what you were getting because it could be legit alcohol, it could be watered down, or it could be God knows what. All right, that is a quick look back at life 100 years ago in 1925. Thank you for joining me, everybody. I'm DeSoto Brown. You've just been watching How Did We Get Here here on ThinkTech. I hope that you will be joining me again in the future for more historical stories of Hawaii like this one. And until then, aloha.